afternoon, friends. Welcome to the STP training webinar, Common Questions from the Testing Trenches on the Future of QA. Our speaker for the day is Bernknopf. I'm Smita Mishra, a professional tester myself, and I'm excited to host you all and Brian on our STP trainings. Incidentally, he's also been a speaker with us at our past STPCon conferences. How was your experience, Brian, for the past few STPCons that you have attended? Anything specific that you liked?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. No, thanks for having me. I think just on looking back on past STPCons, the best thing I can say is the community, right? The opportunity to meet. It's an intimate conference, an opportunity to share stories literally from the trenches and hear others speak about it. Always a great lineup of speakers to hear from with real testing stories.
Excellent. That's probably one of the reasons why I'm associated with it too. Yep, I love the conference. So for all our listeners today, let me tell you, we have our next conference coming up, Spring 2018 STPCon, to be held in the Newport Beach, California, from April 9th through 12th next year. So as you can see on the screen, the call for papers is open for under a couple of days until the 15th of this month. The program committee has already started to review the submissions and shall start filling the slots soon. The conference topics are spread across a wide range like automation, agile, performance, DevOps, mobile, security, leadership, strategy, and much more. So, and we are open to proposals that are more practical and have been tried and tested at work than just being hypotheses. So if you, and also if you are a developer, we would like to hear from you too. And developers who have attended STPCon in past, they say that they have learned a lot from the conference. So submit what you're passionate about, and you could do either a workshop for 3 hours or a session for an hour or both. Visit stpcon.com/submit to submit your proposals. And as STPCon, as STP is now expanding its offerings, we are coming up with some new STP membership programs. The details shall be out soon, so keep looking. As tester myself, I find conferring to be one of the best ways to learn and also to get to know the reputed testers across the globe. I found it really good to build networks, connections, and I want you all to try the same too. The registrations for the conference will be open soon, so I suggest you all to have a look at stpcon.com and join us there. And if you are on Twitter, please share about this webinar with your followers, your connections. We love the shout outs. So if you hear something you like during the webinar, please tweet about it and use @SoftwareTestPro for a retweet from us. Another quick piece of information that I have for you is there is an upcoming webinar, Automated Exploratory Testing by Justin Eisen on 22nd November. And Justin is a senior success engineer at Apply Tools. He's passionate about test automation and loves finding new, efficient, and effective ways to improve software quality with software. So it will be a great opportunity for you to learn from his experience. The link is up for you to review and register, so go for it. All right, folks, let's get started with the webinar today. A very warm welcome, Brian. We are very thrilled to have you with us today. And let me quickly introduce you for all of us here. Brian currently serves as the Managing Director of QA Consultants, USA Incorporated. He is responsible for the daily operations and management of the US business, ongoing sales and business development, staff and project management, and solution creation. QA Consultants has been one of the North America's fastest growing independent software testing services firms over the last 20 years, and Mr. Bernknopf is responsible for their US expansion. He's also a board member to the Dallas Per Scholars program that has the mission of breaking the cycle of poverty through IT job and workforce training. That's truly commendable, Brian. So, and right before we start, few housekeeping points for next 1 hour. All the attendees shall remain muted through the webinar. You can type in your questions and share them with us through your question box. We shall take them up after Brian is done with his presentation. The webinar shall be recorded and posted on the Software Test Pro site for the attendees to go through later. Okay, Brian, so very warm welcome again, and the floor is all yours now.
Great. Well, thank you. And please keep me honest if someone does reach out to you with a question. that makes sense, that you'd like to pause it and have me answer it in real time, I'm happy to do that as well. Can you confirm, Smita, can you see the presentation there?
Yes, I do see
Okay.
the presentation.
Well, great, and thank you for the introduction. Certainly too generous, too kind. But what I was excited about when the folks at STP asked me to speak today, we tossed around a number of topics, but at the bottom line is every day out in the field on projects, meeting with current customers, prospective customers, and our own team internally, we're getting a lot of questions. And I think questions are good. I think it's an opportunity for us to continue to hone our craft as testers. I often talk about whether we're QA professionals, whether we're focused on quality assurance versus testing. At the end of the day, part of our jobs obviously is the work at hand, the testing activities, quality management, and a lot of risk management and risk assessment as well. So through that, and with some help of some special guests as well, we've pulled together, here's 10. The list could easily be 100. All of these can be grouped under a single list as well, or a single question just around what's happening in our industry. And so what we've done is pulled this together of the ones that we thought were the most common questions I'm seeing over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 months. There are probably others. I'd love to hear more. This is an opportunity for me to learn as well and hear what else is on the minds of testers as we have all of these great opportunities to connect, the conferences and webinars and so forth. So with that, we'll just go into it. I'll move somewhat quickly through these, and please ask questions as we go through. So this is on everyone's mind. Obviously, from my business perspective, from my my chosen career, and often we talk about whether you choose testing or testing chooses you. But what will their companies need us? Is there a role for testing going forward? Of course there is. But what is our responsibility as testers and QA professionals, if you will, to stay relevant and to have and maintain and demand and maintain your seat at the table? It's certainly highly commoditized and becoming more and more so. But there are many public examples where quality is front and center, and specifically a failure in quality. We love to talk about healthcare.gov, and sure, it was an epic fail, and it has every IT failure point that you want to talk about, from project management to budget overruns to lack of testing to security issues, performance issues. There were so many ways that could have gone differently, or that quality could have improved, the customer experience. We see a tremendous amount of requests and conversations around the role of testing for UI and UX, which is a little different than what our traditional commoditized functional testing has been over the last, let's say, decade or so. So now we're getting into the quality of the customer experience. We're getting into UX testing. There are methodologies, frameworks, and heuristics that we can follow. And especially when we look at app development, these are all areas where testing can not only be required but also stay relevant. Obviously, Equifax is on everyone's mind as consumers, as folks here in the U.S. In general, around the lack of control that we as individuals have over some of our data. This was a security breach, plain and simple, a simple Apache patch, but obviously nothing is so simple. We do include that under the guise of quality, and certainly when testers are asking us, and whether they be our customers or other employees in our team and so forth, what other skills should they be looking at? All you have to do is talk about Equifax and the 30 other breaches that happened in the months before it, as to why we need to all know enough about security vulnerability assessments. So that's where we like to talk about multi-tools. If you're a manual functional tester, there are many other things that you can do to ensure that your skills stay up to date, and that's the purpose of this slide, is to encourage you, take my own medicine and something that I'm continuously learning, but always looking to make sure that you've got more than one tool, that you're more than just a QA professional who knows how to do functional manual testing. I'll pause there for just a second. I don't see any virtual hand raising or violent disagreements with that, but we'll move on. So the next big area that we see is around DevOps. What is DevOps? What is CI/CD? What is CI/CD/CT? And certainly, as a vendor, we have to talk about this a lot. As a professional services organization, we're asked this question a lot. What's your DevOps strategy? But at a tester level, what's our DevOps viewpoint? And how different is that than the conversations from a year ago to 5 years ago around what's your agile QA approach? And we start to see that this is the same conversation, just with some different words. And from our perspective, obviously, we are part of DevOps, just like we're part of agile. You can't. And I've had customers and clients that have come up and said, "Oh, well, we have agile development, so now we need to implement agile testing." And obviously that's not agile, right? So it's the whole thing. And DevOps works the same way. We've got to have a knowledge at the tester level of where they can add value in a DevOps solution or in a DevOps strategy if the organization is moving to DevOps. You cannot have DevOps for development and certainly have a waterfall QA. Those aren't processes aren't going to mix. What we do see though is the impact and the requirement to have more SDET roles as part of DevOps teams. We need to have testers who can write code and write code quickly, who can implement same-day tests that are run on check-in and fix them as needed and update them as well. The value of an SDET, or software development engineer and test, is certainly seen as a much more common and rising skill set in our ranks. And the SDET very gladly can support development activities, just like we would hope that developers can support QA activities. So as Sminda said, for the next conference, I mean, we'd love to have developers participating in quality and QA and testing discussions. In some of these DevOps teams, those roles certainly bleed together. Continuous testing is a fantastic concept. What we need is to get more and more organizations actually attempting to implement it and working on the investment to implement it. But there is no reason in today's CI and CD world why we can't have tests run automatically on check-in. It doesn't take away from the manual tests or the end-to-end tests that need to be run and traditional automated testing and so forth. But we'd certainly see a lot of value in those automation skills being part of DevOps. And again, as just the final point here, there are still roles for the non-technical and traditional QA, and we would certainly encourage those who are not technical to find those roles as well. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, I think we're doing good. So no hand raises, so we'll move on.
We do have a question here, Brian, if you
Sure.
would like to take on DevOps. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, so this is Ramesh from Bangalore, and he says he would like to know how services-based company benefit in DevOps. He says, as you're aware, that many companies purely into performance testing and need to wait till products pass one cycle of functional testing. So he wants to understand how that would all fit in together.
That was Ramesh. That's excellent. What a great question. And it bleeds into some of this that I have later on, but let me address probably not all of your question, but the one point that certainly stands out, which is, do we wait for functional code complete to run performance tests? Certainly, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that would have been the only, that would have been my requirement, that we have to go through a round of manual functional testing for a particular release to say, this is ready for automated testing or even performance testing as a subset. That certainly you cannot do that, right? As you said, in services companies, how do we and I take that in two ways, right? We're certainly, there are a lot of services companies doing providing QA services, but even within our customers and within organizations today that have their own QA teams, they are a services organization and oftentimes a cost to the rest of the organization as well. So we're all part of this services ecosystem, if you will. And in those cases, as the COE or the QA manager or a services group, you can't say, well, I need 3 more months. Yeah, that's great that you've created code and deployed it in the same day, but now I need 3 months of testing and preparation for performance or a load test or whatever that next phase is. So we're experimenting with this. This is the best way I can answer it. We've done load tests in the same day on brand new code. There's lots of, you have to take a lot of assumptions with that, but the tools have allowed us to get to a position where we can start to experiment. So we have tools now that support, as you know, with either cloud-based infrastructures or some of the more standard commercial tools that allow us to do a rapid load test, and it takes the right people, right? It takes folks that understand performance and load testing, that understand performance engineering. It's certainly not the ideal state in the sense that that's the only plan. You still want to have methodical, planned out, and recurring performance tests, just like you would with regression. But there is a case to be made that during DevOps, during a continuous development cycle, if you're deploying code every day, you can gain a level of consistency by running a load test every day as well. Could be on a separate environment, could be on the same environment. So let me pause there. I hope that answers your question. But you certainly, I guess the short version is, you certainly do have to look for ways to be innovative. And that's part of this modern testing and our role in modern development architectures. Okay, thank you. Okay, and the next one comes from a friend of mine and coworker at Amica. Michael asked, and obviously I'm a vendor, so I love this question. But how do we? Are there more modern ways to approach vendor management and vendor engagements? Right. So certainly, as a vendor, there's a certain role that you have to play as both an advisor as well as contractually and so forth. But we as vendors, there certainly is the whether you're onshore, whether you're offshore, whether it's outsourced or co-sourced, there's always this constant. There's been a traditional or historical approach to kind of commoditize testing. A little bit about what we addressed in the last question. Do we need to have several months of planning, several months of long manual testing followed by automation and performance? We're certainly seeing that is a shift, and it's certainly for us as a community of practice. For those of you on the call that are testers that are either part of outsourcing organizations, onshore or offshore, or part of vendor organizations, this is an area for us to start to shine and to start to really find ways to be proactively innovative in providing value. And for those of you that are part of organizations that employ offshore or onshore, outsourced or co-sourced vendors, this is an opportunity for you all to look at how to get the most out of those relationships. But long deployment cycles, plausible deniability, right? Saying, oh, well, we didn't know about this, and that's not where we were focused. And then of course, this is all or nothing. We have to do the whole test. We can't just do a partial test. Those approaches are certainly not keeping up with the need of the business, and that's of course what we're all after: is can the business deploy rapidly to go to market quickly in line with their business expectations. So rapid deployment, just common sense testing. Does everything need to be tested, or can we focus on the top risk areas? And to be fair, these large contracts aren't incented to show reduction in headcount or an increase in innovation. And those are certainly things that we look for and we try to put in place and advise our customers to put in place. But you want to see that you build long-term trusted relationships, but those are based on continuing to move the needle. Reduction in the total number of resources, but maybe not the total number of a total amount of work per se, but the reduction in risk as products go live more and more rapidly. And again, it's accountability and common sense are the things that we see the most often. Who is the QA team accountable for, whether that's from a contract relationship or certainly as a COE or as a team? Are we accountable to finding ways to do QA better, to test more rapidly, and how are we measured on that, right? As metrics sometimes or often drive the behavior. And then, of course, common sense. Does every permutation need to be tested? We'd love it to do that, but we'll never go live if that's the case. So how do we approach with a risk-based testing, risk-based analysis approach to doing that? Okay. All right, moving on. This is another one we get pretty often, which is, should testers know programming, and which one? I just threw a few out here. There is no one silver bullet that as a tester you need to know this language. If you're a part of a services organization, then of course there's the idea that you should know as many as you can, and that increases your opportunity to be on as many new projects as you can. If you are part of an organization that has a standard technology stack, we often talk about this when we're doing tool selection. Let's say Selenium is a pretty common test automation approach, but Selenium has a lot of options for language. If the developers are using Java, then Selenium Java usually makes sense because we know, number one, the access to talent, the available resources, and so forth. As a tester, that gives you other career paths as well. But also we see Python, when we're getting into BDD and TDD, we see a lot of obviously of Gherkin, get the logo here. So the kind of in line with question number 2 around the SDETs, as we get more and more software development engineers, part of these programs, so it's not only related to test automation and certainly not only related to GUI test automation, but writing back-end scripts and writing automated scripts that only work for one particular technology. The more that we see these requests, I'll give you a great example of we had one the other day, building test harnesses. Sometimes those test harnesses have to be written in compiled languages versus scripting languages, and they're very difficult projects to do. And being able to have the right skill set and then be able to context switch from one language to another are invaluable skills of software development engineers in test. Pause there for a second. Okay, great. Moving right along. So what roles are there for the non-technical tester? So I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but we often see the ilities as a great area for additional non-technical testers and accessibility, usability, and compatibility. So on the accessibility side, that's for those with disabilities. What we found with this is this is hard work. This takes a lot of there are tools that are out there, but the tools only provide kind of binary answers, right? It still requires that and I'll give you a great example. So for visually impaired, a tool may say that there is or is not the appropriate tagging for a given image, but it won't tell you if that tag is right. So the tag may be there, but it may not be the right tag. It may have been a cut and paste area, and it says this is a picture of a horse and it's a picture of a car. So that's obviously a severe defect. Those are the kinds of things where it does take methodical, logic-oriented testers who can do functional testing that may not be fully trained as developers or technical. So accessibility is a great area. Usability is the best area for new hires. There is a methodology and a framework that can be applied to usability testing, but I think we all know kids are being born today that know how to use modern digital devices. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, but there is certainly a lot of areas for usability testing, and younger team members certainly know whether something is usable. So that there's a great entry area into that, and it also allows us to apply a methodology to it so that it's not just in the wild or ad hoc, but there is an approach to usability in accordance with design frameworks and so forth, depending on how sophisticated the application is or its requirements. So, and Smita touched on this a little bit. I think this is one of the areas where we see with some of the opportunities to bring our fellow citizens into the QA world, right? So it doesn't matter, again, what country you're in, there are always folks that are looking for the next step or to enter into an IT career. And as Smita said, this is kind of a passion area of mine, but usability testing is a great place for us to educate and bring new folks into that type of world. Compatibility testing certainly lends itself to automation. So I threw Sauce Labs up here as a great example of that, where and only in the sense that there are plenty of tools that do similar things, but in terms of ease of use, not necessarily needing to be a technical tester. Obviously, somebody has to write scripts, but execution of tools is not necessarily a technical requirement. Today's automated test frameworks, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, that are written either customized or generic, are set up to be keyword driven, where you don't have to be coding to run frameworks or run the tools that those frameworks run in. So automation is not a only for engineers activity. And like I said, there's plenty of tools out there that help enable us with that. Okay, great. I think we're about halfway through here. So please ask some questions if there's any. And from a community of testers, I will say I have absolutely no issues if there are disagreements or alternative opinions to some of these. This is exactly what these types of conversations are designed to engender, is just to create the conversation. And I'd love to hear feedback. And if there are alternative views, we'd love to do that. So I've got this one from a friend and client, Kevin. Really thought we talk about this philosophically all the time. Kevin's running a QA team over at SuperValue. Has testing changed how has testing changed over the past few years, and what's the outlook? And then here's a little bit more of some of Kevin's comments here, right? So software testing was an up and coming job growth area. Now it's seen as a tax, and I wanted to write that in there because that's a great way to see a perspective on testing. Are we a tax that you buy an IT product and you're taxed with having to test it? We certainly, as QA professionals, don't want to see ourselves that way, and we don't want that to be the perception. But in some instances, that does occur. And how do the importance of QA, how has that changed over the years? And then we'll talk about accreditation. So I can say that firsthand, and certainly it sometimes takes a little bit of a spin, but firsthand have seen how QA is not a tax but a value add. I've seen that in the sense that there are organizations who cannot go live until they test. They cannot gain the business objective, which is almost always tied to revenue. So they're at a revenue loss or at a revenue neutral until QA can complete its job. So I've seen organizations where the marketing team is hiring QA directly because they cannot afford to fail. Again, we've talked about healthcare.gov will be our example for years and years to come on this. But there are plenty of other examples out there, as I'm sure you are all very well aware of. But the idea that the impact of a bad launch or a poor customer experience is certainly more burdensome than the quote-unquote tax that might need to be assessed during the SDLC. The issue of accreditation is a touchy one. If those of you that follow it, it's certainly a topic of heated debate in our industry. And I think the reason I wanted to include it on this slide is I think we should all be aware of what certifications are out there. We should be aware as to whether or not those are important in what circles. And I think that there is no single yes or no answer, as to who's governing QA certifications and as to whether or not it's a de facto standard. It certainly is not. There are certain areas where getting a certification is a sense of personal accomplishment, which is absolutely admirable and encouraged. There are other organizations where certifications are not needed, are not even checked, and again, that could be part of the overall discussion in our community around certifications. That's kind of where I'll leave that conversation, and it certainly, without giving the typical answer, typical consulting answer of it depends. But there are certainly ways in which certifications can be valuable to individuals and valuable to organizations as well. Okay. Great. I know we're moving along quite rapidly here, so without being able to see your faces or any comments, I hope this is helpful as we continue going through this. Is from a friend of mine, Adrian, who's running a QA and metrics team. Does the lack of co-location and testing teams lead to a testing inefficiency? So, as you can see, these common threads, right? Everyone's worried about whether it's DevOps or CI/CD or even Agile and just the modern testing approaches. What makes sense, right? And when we're working with vendors, when we're working with different geographies, what makes sense, and is there a built-in inefficiency? So you may get a labor arbitrage, you may get a cost efficiency, but then do you have a work inefficiency issue? Are there additional costs of offshore? Can testing be done successfully via remote? And how do you do DevOps if you're not sitting together? So the answer is, of course, right? You can. There are costs of doing offshore that can be monetized, right? So additional costs, and just in terms of turnaround time and time zone issues, right? But you're comparing, the whole package. We have certainly seen failures with testing not being done on site, and we've seen very successful organizations where testing is done by different teams and in different locations, and the same thing goes for DevOps. What's really great about the DevOps piece is the tools, the collaboration. So I've got testing teams using Slack. I've got automated testing teams sharing code via Slack. And those tools are not only for developers, and I think that's an important takeaway, is especially as we look at who we're hiring, as we're bringing more and more new hires into the QA world, and getting them excited about being developers in test if they're coming from that type of background or coming from the non-technical side. These tools, whether it's Slack or Confluence or Trello and Asana and all of these collaboration tools that are out there, it certainly is a full-time job just figuring out which one to use and how to use it. But the new folks that we're hiring are expecting to use these tools, and as organizations, whether we're consulting companies and services vendors or just within our own QA organizations, these are great things to see and to yeah, I should certainly say within appropriate security constraints, but are great things to see our teams using to collaborate. And yes, DevOps can be done with distributed teams. It requires reliance on some of these collaboration tools. Yeah, and like I said, the last bullet here, certainly on-site has its both benefits and costs, but the ability of the tester to take accountability, right? This idea of plausible deniability, I only tested what I was supposed to test and wasn't aware of these things. We've got to, as QA professionals, that can't be our fallback answer, right? We have got to do everything we can to find the other areas that are not being addressed and to add value throughout that process. Because again, see question number one, you know, what's our role and what's our future? Okay. All right, just a few more here. Certainly open to, we'll certainly have some time here for questions as well. So what's the ideal tester? I get this all the time. When we're looking at, you know, how do we hire new testers and or organizations that I'm working with that are hiring their testing teams, and some of you who are on this call may have heard me give this speech before, but no one goes to school to be a QA professional. There's not a degree in quality assurance or quality engineering, right? We're starting to see more and more programs and dedicated to this, and that's wonderful. But there's not a 4-year degree in software testing. There are some certifications that we're seeing, and obviously the 2-year programs are having a higher focus on this. But you've got to have the attitude, the aptitude, and the ability. Those are the things that we look for as an individual level. We're seeing more and more SDETs, and as a much more, going back to the DevOps discussion and the focus on automation and so forth, we're seeing a lot more need for SDETs. But I would also say this doesn't mean that you're coming out of a 4-year engineering program. It doesn't mean that you have to have a computer science or computer engineering degree. Gaming schools and secondary education are showing great, you know, promise. I mean, I think it's taken us a little while as part of a program here with the city of Dallas, where we had a long conversation about this. And 5 years ago, it would have been very hard to publicly state you don't need a college degree, especially at the highest levels of our industry. When there's so many applicants, obviously a college degree is an equalizer or an eliminator to start to weed through the number of applicants. But when you see Google and Apple and Facebook leading the way on hiring out of high school, it starts to open the doors for everyone to be a little bit more comfortable with, does the person have the attitude to be a good software tester? Do they have the aptitude and inquisitive abilities to really do what we do? Whether they are going to go on more on the development side and SDET side, or more on the traditional functional side, usability and so forth. That allows us to look at that and put people to work even prior to college. Gaming schools have shown to be a great, folks go through gaming schools, they want to be game developers and game programmers. Again, you're not going to gaming school to be a game tester. But that's a very hot area, and you go through this program, you now understand the rapidness in which games are developed and the technologies that are involved. And some want to stay in that industry, but what we found is giving those folks an opportunity to test multiple technologies and see lots of different things versus working on the same game for 3 years. That starts to give these folks a great opportunity. And kind of my 3 traits that we always talk about are a loud voice, thick skin, and attention to detail. And that bordering on obsessive is something that essentially would be told of me by those who know me. But that I hope that helps. I mean, it's a very common question around what are we looking for. Unfortunately, there is no ideal answer. Okay. All right. Well, so Smita had a number of questions for us, and I certainly appreciate her offering what she's seeing out in the field as well. So, what roles do we see testing playing in these latest technologies? So, you know, I'll put it this way: I am begging to do some AR and augmented reality testing. You see things like augmented reality windshields or vehicle-to-vehicle communication, or some of this vehicle to infrastructure, and the future that we're seeing as technology is evolving all around us. A lot of these things are being tested in labs and tested by the companies creating them. But I think us as QA professionals should do everything we can to stay abreast of where these technologies are going. With autonomous vehicles, we're seeing a really great leap in cognitive systems and AI, and we're seeing the opportunities moving very rapidly. But you know, this is not testing Angry Birds. This is now testing whether or not you know, these things are going to be safe for humans, and those are things that we should take very seriously as we start to learn about what are the right levels of testing, what are the right risk assessments we do during this type of testing. And that stuff is moving so quickly. So we have to figure out how to respond quickly to those testing needs. We've got a new technology, it's AI based, or it's an autonomous something, or even just you know, the integration to the hardware. If it's you know, augmented reality, those types of things require different mindsets in testing. Rapid test harness development, focusing in on the risk areas and eliminating the other ones, and even being able to be less. One of the great examples is code generation for automation, right? Being less tied to the emotional part of writing code for test automation, not being afraid to throw it away, especially if you can create code generators that automate code based on certain tasks to automate, but then maybe that application changes so frequently it would then be thrown away. That's okay, so long as it's serving its purpose and still providing the right ROI. And I covered this earlier, but I'll say it again, because especially Smita, you talked about the IoT and the SMAC areas. You know, everything we do in this area is related to the customer retention, quality of the customer experience. These are all things where, going back to the value of QA, we're not necessarily the tax. We're the opportunity. We're the decision makers as to whether or not this is going to drive revenue or eliminate the project. And that's where we really have an important seat at the table. Okay. Great. And then another one here, which again, excellent question. You know, is there life after testing? And how do I take these skills and move forward? As a career QA professional, you know, I don't know. Do you want to do anything else, right? But those that have started off in testing and maybe wanted to move into development, or decide that this is not the path that they want to be on, and I talk to customers all the time about ensuring that there are career paths for testers within the organization, not just that they have to move out in order to move on. And in that case, and in some of those cases, that means that they will go on to non-testing and non-QA related parts of that organization. And that's one of the best things we can do for the companies that we work for, is if we move on without, you know, outside of testing, that we've taken this borderline obsessive approach to quality and to attention to detail, that we take it with us through the other layers of the organization. We want to remain agile and remain flexible, but to take this and you know, look at CIOs who had a QA background, or CFOs who had a QA background, and understand the importance of this. Those are the best things that we can do as we look to improve our skills and move on within organizations. Certainly, as a tester in an organization, you can move on. You become an expert in your chosen field or in your industry. Obviously, if you're a consultant or a contractor, you understand that part of the business, or you may become an expert in technology. You may be testing SAP and then want to move on to do other SAP related work, for example. So those are very easy dots to connect, of course. And then, of course, moving into the business side of things, and I've seen this done very successfully as well. Being a tester on a particular product, working for IT, and then moving into not even BA roles, which are also another obvious move, but moving from the IT side to the business overall, being a product owner or product manager, knowing how that product had been created over years, then moving into the ability to set the course of that product going forward. And then, of course, development, as we talked about, I'm sure a lot of you on the call started off as engineers, have a development background, may choose to go back into that as well, or out of IT altogether. There's certainly areas that are that we can take these skill sets. I mean, I would love to hear more, and I would love to hear success stories of folks that have successfully parlayed into other careers thanks to their QA background. I mean, I think the more we talk about those stories, the better off we all are. But I see copywriters and copy reviewers, editors, technical writers. Obviously, that is a common thread between those three. But we certainly see lots of opportunities to do other things that are not IT related, again, with that attention to detail and focus on quality. I believe that's the end there. You definitely, Smita already went a little bit through my bio. I am obviously happy to receive calls and questions and hear more. If this is well received, we can do a version 2 with new questions, or I can update it for the website to have additional data on it. So Smita, I'll turn it back over to you.
We do have few questions, Brian, that have come up. In fact, I did not pick up a couple of them because I knew you were going to speak about them. So sorry, Yogesh. And I think there was from Ramesh, who again asked about the testing in part of IoT and virtual reality. But there is another question here. So this one, I think, goes back to your DevOps slide. It's from Yogesh. He says, how can testers involve in CI/CD for continuous integration? There is very short time period.
Can you just say that one more time? How do testers involved in CI/CD?
Yeah, like what he's saying is, in continuous integration, typically the time cycle is so short, the time period for delivery, the release is so short. So how do testers get involved in the process?
Yeah, this is why it's one of the top questions that we get, right? We have to find ways to be more relevant in this conversation. The answer is not don't test it, and the answer is not, well, the developer tested it and put it on the deployment schedule and that's it. Yes, a significant level of reliance has to be on automated checkers, right? So code check-in, automated scripts that are run, especially for regression. But DevOps does not eliminate the requirement of, let's call it the Agile Scrum team that put that piece of code there. So even if it's a daily deployment, that means that functional testing had to have occurred daily. If we are, as an industry, doing this right, and certainly we're not always doing it right, but if we are, then the risk has to be minimized by the size of the change. That they have to be small enough and consumable enough that they can stack up to a point that it doesn't have to deploy, but that we can run end-to-end tests, or that the changes are at a level that are consumable enough that within the Scrum teams, the testing can occur appropriately. But we as testers have to have a loud enough voice to know when risk is occurring, that it may have been a 10-minute development change, but it fundamentally affects the finances of the particular product. That requires additional case for pause. So it's probably not the best answer, but this is where we are as a QA industry are trying to find better ways to have that conversation and better tools at our disposal. So again, the automated runs at check-in are certainly a first step in that area. Good question.
Mm-hmm. Under one comes from Mike. He says, what suggestions do you have for people who do not believe certifications are important, but their company is pushing them to have them or follow them?
That's a great question. I'd probably have to think about that one. I definitely don't want to. I don't want to set anyone up to get into a organizational disagreement. I guess I will say this. Individually, we can choose to believe in them or not, and believe in their value. Obviously there's payments involved and so forth. I guess you could equate it to whether you need another degree as well, obviously on a larger scale. I think that there is enough rhetoric and conversation out there that can be, and personally, I have not seen anybody pull this together, but there is enough rhetoric out there to make the case as to the value of those certs at an industry level, and or to say that there's enough discussion that says it's a topic of discussion. At an organizational level, if the organization is requiring it, then obviously that's the organization. But if that organization is willing to listen to a well thought out discussion, then I think that would be an area, Mike, that you could pursue. But certainly I'm going to stop at I certainly don't have the answer and don't want to put anybody in a bad position with their own organization. So I should certainly stop at that point.
Perfectly fine, Brian. I mean, we can come back on this response anytime later if we need. There is another point from Ellie Bonner. So Ellie says, question on the value or point of QA. What about the function of QA as a exploratory testing? I think he means exploratory tester. This can be a better, more valuable approach than rote testing through scripts. We are seeing this more in our role in QA for a financial services company. The issues we find can be found more quickly through intelligent exploratory testing as opposed to working through a massive spreadsheet of test scenarios.
So I agree. I don't agree I'm not saying exploratory testing and nothing else. And I think you're touching on another very, very good topic of discussion that's happening right now in our industry as to exploratory session, context-driven testing versus let's call it traditional script-based testing and the schools that are written about. My view is I've seen both be very successful. I think that our clients love the exploratory testing that we do. It allows for rapid discovery of defects. There are cases to be made as to whether you want to call it more traditional or just basic or more documented methodologies, and probably documented is not the right word there, but exploratory testing is also documented. So script-based methodologies where those scripts are documented and processed in a methodical order. That's really my point about modern approaches to testing. Exploratory testing is a critical aspect of it. It's certainly being seen as successful. It is by no means to say it's that way or the highway. There are use cases for where both can be combined. So certainly would endorse the continued use of exploratory testing. There are a lot of great tools out there to aid in that as well. And they provide excellent documentation and feedback loop into the development cycle, into training, and into the business as well. So I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Brian. That does help. I think the catch there would also be because specifically it's in financial services. So anytime it's a little more regulated domain, there are certain things which are done to be more compliant with the systems, which may or may not be as productive or effective. But I mean, I'm just trying to add to, yes, exploratory testing is one of the best ways to do it. It is scripted, so there is no, we shouldn't confuse that since we are doing exploratory, it means there are no scripts. But in regulated domains, I think there are some things needed more than just exploratory testing or just basics charters.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's another question here, Brian. It's from Satinder. He says, as a person with 10 years of experience managing test team and not having hands-on testing, neither manual nor automation, how he or she can add value to firm with testing perspectives so that firms should not consider him as a tax or cost on firm. Any thoughts or suggestions? And this could actually lead to a longer discussion. So if there's any answer which you want to give a short answer and then expand on it later as a typed up response, which we can post, it's really welcome.
Yeah, I'll just give my gut answer, which is, just there are two things. One, read as much as you can. Make sure you're following the trends in our industry, because the value you add as a manager is empowering your teams to learn more and follow some of these trends. Go out, research the latest, whether it's tools or approaches to testing. Exploratory testing would be a great one. And then set up sessions and pilot it within your organization. So that's certainly my gut reaction to that. And then more of a fun one is, and I certainly try, I don't do a great job at this, but I try to take my own medicine with this one, is get your hands dirty. It's been a long time since I've written automated scripts, but every now and then I'll find an opportunity to write scripts, or at least do an automation framework design session, and learn from our teams on some of these newer tools. So that's kind of the short answer, at least quick reaction.
Mm-hmm. There's another question from Magadi. This is a different Ramesh, but it's very close to what we've already discussed. So I'll just read it out to you. And if you think that we've completely answered, we can just skip. He says, IoT, mobile technologies, and AI are developing rapidly. How do these new tech horizon areas impact current testing practice? I think we've talked about that.
Yeah, I think we covered it. Yeah.
Yeah. Is
happy
current
to have
QA,
further discussions. But.
Yeah, is current QA practices, are they adequate? And if not, then what are the new challenges going forward in terms of QA testing space?
So I'll just tie that with, maybe this is a nice way to tie it all together, and we're at the top of the hour here. But every week there's some other example of a failure of an app, or of a service, or some sort of new technology that has failed. We're going to see a lot more of that as the technology continues to move that much more rapidly. Whether it's from just a fun app on the App Store to enterprise apps to autonomous vehicles and so forth. That we're seeing what is often considered a glitch, which is a pet peeve of my own, right? Which is, these are not glitches, or these are true defects. Then that's what QA does, is help identify those defects and prevent them from launching. So we see this, and we're going to continue to see it. That's the fuel we need to keep finding better ways to keep up with development, not slow it down.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's another question from Mike, which says, and this is probably going to be the second last question for us. He says, I've worked with many testing consultant groups in the past. Many times they come in and assist your team, but lack the ability to help with thought leadership and partnering with companies. I know this is not the case with QA consultants, by the way, but I would like to get your inputs on how consultant groups can best partner and bring new ideas to companies that may be stuck in the old ways of doing things in testing.
Certainly a great question. So, and I appreciate the nice comment. The bottom line is, I think for those of you that are consultants on the line, and I think we obviously have to continue to keep our eye on the ball here, which is we're not there just to run through the scripts and then report back, right? It's how do we make this business move forward in their direction, reduce their risk, and the importance has to be on as Mike said, the innovation and thought leadership. There's just so much out there, and I'll say, all I can give is my own examples, but you set up your let your technology work for you. So Google Alerts is a great one. Flipboard is a great one. You just put in the keywords that you're trying to focus on: AI, testing, automated testing, quality assurance. So much being written about every day on these new technologies that, as vendors, and for those of you that are vendors on this call, you bring those ideas. No one's going to tell you, no, let's not innovate, right? There may not be budget or time, but there are certainly always going to be opportunities to look for ways to try something new. And the only way you can get to that point is by knowing what's out there and what others are doing more of these webinars and participating in the community.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to take the last question. Prashant, you asked if the session is recorded. Yes, it will be, and it will be at Software Test Pro for you. And there's one question from Abhinav, which says, what are the basic steps to start testing COE? That's like a long one, but do you want to take it up? Or we are also running out on time, so if you want to write a longer response to that, we can take that.
Yeah, let's cover that afterwards. Okay.
All right. So then we're done with the quick Q&A for now. So thanks for your time, Brian. It was very helpful session on understanding a broader view on what is going on in the testing world and where the future is headed to. You gave some good insights for building testing skills and learning to be better testers here. So I also loved the audience questions and engagements. I'm sure our attendees found it very informative and useful too. So thanks again, Brian, and I hope to see you in California.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Well, everyone, this concludes our webinar for today. Any questions unanswered will be responded to and answered by Brian and posted on softwaretestpro.com. Thanks everyone for joining, and more importantly, thanks for being so engaging and making the most of the webinar for yourself and for the whole group. Stay tuned for more webinars and online trainings that are coming soon. And if you haven't signed up yet for the upcoming webinar, which is Automated Exploratory Testing by Justin Eisen on 22nd November, the link is up for registration at softwaretestpro.com. So go ahead and do it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week ahead and see you all in California in April 2018.